Amsterdam, 1637. A single flower bulb sells for the price of a mansion on the canal. The buyer? A merchant who borrowed against his entire estate to own it. The seller? A farmer who became wealthier than nobility overnight. But here's the twist. Within 3 weeks, that same bulb couldn't buy you a loaf of bread. This is the story of Tulip Mania, and it's not really about flowers. It's about the moment an entire society forgot the difference between price and value, and paid for it in financial ruin. You've heard the headlines. Tulips crashed an economy. Gardeners became millionaires. The Dutch went insane over flowers. But those headlines miss the point entirely. Because Tulip Mania wasn't a story about stupidity. It was a story about innovation, status, and the birth of modern financial markets. And if you think it's ancient history, look around. The same pattern is playing out right now, in your portfolio, in your neighborhood, in assets you probably own. If you understand what really happened in those Dutch taverns in 1637, you'll understand every bubble that came after. So let's reverse engineer the first financial mania in recorded history and figure out why humans keep making the same mistake. Before we go further, if you're here because you're tired of surface-level history and want to understand the hidden mechanics that shape our world, you're in the right place. Hit subscribe, because we're about to decode how economic systems actually work. Let's set the stage. The Dutch Republic in the early 1600s wasn't just rich, it was the richest place on earth. Amsterdam controlled global trade. Dutch ships brought back spices from Indonesia, silver from Japan, and tulips from the Ottoman Empire. But here's what matters. The Dutch had invented something new, a middle class with disposable income and no inherited status. Merchants, traders, craftsmen, they had money, but no coats of arms, no land, no titles. And in a society obsessed with hierarchy, that was a problem. You couldn't buy nobility, but you could buy the symbols of it. Enter the tulip. When the first bulbs arrived from Constantinople, they were exotic, rare, and phenomenally expensive. Only the aristocracy could afford them. Owning a tulip garden meant you had arrived. It was a status marker you could display in your window, on your estate, in your portrait. And then something critical happened. The Dutch figured out how to cultivate them. Suddenly, tulips weren't just for the elite. They were accessible. But not all tulips. The most valuable ones, the ones with rare color patterns caused by a mosaic virus, those remain scarce. And scarcity plus demand equals one thing, a market. But the Dutch didn't just create a market, they innovated it. This is where the story gets interesting, because the Dutch were the world's best financial engineers. They had already invented the stock market, the joint stock company, and maritime insurance. They understood leverage, futures contracts, and speculative instruments, and they applied all of that machinery to tulips. Here's how it worked. Tulip bulbs only bloom once a year. You plant them in autumn, they flower in spring, then you dig them up in summer. But traders didn't want to wait, so they created a futures market. You could buy and sell tulip bulbs while they were still in the ground. You weren't trading flowers, you were trading contracts, promises, bets on future value. And then it escalated. Taverns became trading floors. Guild halls turned into speculative exchanges. Regular people who had never seen a tulip bloom, started buying contracts on margin. You didn't need the full price up front. You could put down 10% and leverage the rest. A baker could buy a contract for a rare Semper Augustus bulb, sell it a week later for double, pocket the profit, and never touch an actual flower. The mechanics were identical to modern options trading, except the underlying asset was a plant. Now here's the social physics at work. In a boom, everyone around you is getting rich. Your neighbor bought a contract last month and just bought a new house. Your brother-in-law quit his job because he made more trading tulips in a week than he made in a year as a tailor. The entire society is watching wealth accumulate at a pace that seems supernatural. And the human brain is wired to learn from the success of others. If everyone is winning, the strategy must be sound. Therefore, you get in. But there's a second force at play. The newly wealthy need to differentiate themselves. A common tulip won't do. They need the rare ones, the ones with exotic names like Viceroy or Admiral van der Eyck. Prices for these bulbs go parabolic, and here's the trap. When price becomes the signal of value, the feedback loop becomes self-reinforcing. The bulb is valuable because it's expensive. It's expensive because it's valuable. By late 1636, a single Semper Augustus bulb sold for 6,000 guilders. To put that in context, a skilled craftsman earned 250 guilders a year. One flower equaled 24 years of labor. And people genuinely believed this was rational. They had convinced themselves that tulips were the new gold, that foreign kings would pay any price, that demand would never stop. This time was different. Except it wasn't. February 1637. A routine tulip auction in Haarlem. A modest batch of bulbs goes up for sale. And for the first time in months, there are no buyers. Not at the asking price. Not at half the asking price. Silence. The auctioneer lowers the price again. Still nothing. And in that moment, the market realizes something terrifying. There is no floor. The contracts they were trading weren't backed by intrinsic value. They were backed by the belief that someone else would pay more. And when that belief evaporated, so did the price. The collapse was instant. Within days, bulbs that sold for thousands were worthless. Merchants who had leveraged their estates were ruined. Futures contracts became toxic, counterparties defaulted. The entire speculative apparatus disintegrated. But here's what's critical. The Dutch economy didn't collapse. Amsterdam didn't burn. The merchant fleet kept sailing. Because the real economy, the one built on trade and production and goods, was never dependent on tulip prices. The crash destroyed speculators. It didn't destroy the system, but it did leave a scar, and it taught the world a lesson that we have spent 4 centuries ignoring. So why does this keep happening? Why do we see the same pattern repeat in the South Sea bubble, the railway mania, the dot-com crash, the housing crisis, the crypto boom? Because the mechanics are always the same. Financial innovation creates a new asset class. Leverage makes it accessible to the middle class. Early adopters get rich. Social proof kicks in. Prices decouple from fundamentals. The belief that this time is different becomes consensus. And then someone blinks. The psychology is hardwired. Humans are status-seeking, loss-averse, and wired to mimic successful behavior. We learn faster from stories than from data, and every bubble has a story. This time, it's the internet. This time, it's real estate. This time, it's blockchain. The narrative changes. The structure doesn't. But there's a deeper truth here. Bubbles aren't accidents. They're features of the system. They emerge whenever you combine 3 ingredients: financial innovation, a rising middle class, and a scarce status good. The innovation creates access. The middle class creates demand. The status good creates the emotional fuel. And when those 3 align, you get a mania. The tulip wasn't special. It was just the first time the formula appeared in a society advanced enough to document it. So what do you do with this? How do you protect yourself in a world where bubbles are inevitable? You learn to recognize the pattern. You watch for the moment when price becomes detached from utility, when the narrative shifts from use value to speculative value, when everyone around you is suddenly an expert in an asset class they discovered 6 months ago. And then you ask the simplest question. If the music stopped tomorrow, what would this actually be worth? Because that's the floor. Everything above it is belief. And belief is expensive. The Dutch survived Tulip Mania because their wealth was built on ships, trade, and infrastructure. The speculators lost everything, but the system endured. The lesson isn't don't speculate. The lesson is don't confuse speculation with the foundation. Build on things that have use value. And when the tulips start selling for mansions, remember, gravity always wins. The only question is when. If this clicked something into place for you, If you just realize that history isn't a list of dates, but a pattern of human behavior repeating on loop, then subscribe. Because we're just getting started. There are 1,000 more bubbles to decode, 1,000 more empires to reverse engineer, and every single one of them has something to teach you about the world you're living in right now. Hit that button. Let's keep going.